He still has so much more time to go. I don't want this to be the end.
Tennis experts are finally saying what no one wanted to admit. Novak Djokovic just wasted his last real chance at a Grand Slam title.
It's hard to say because for his career, I want him to keep going.
24 majors, 428 weeks at number one, the greatest statistical resume in the history of the sport, and it might all end with a loss that will haunt him forever. The 2026 Australian Open was supposed to be different. This was his fortress. 10 titles on these courts. A perfect 10-for-10 record in Melbourne finals. No man in history had ever beaten Novak Djokovic in a championship match at Rod Laver Arena. Until now. Carlos Alcaraz didn't just win. He completed his career Grand Slam at 22 years old, the youngest man in history to hold all 4 majors. And he did it by handing Djokovic his first ever Australian Open final defeat. But this isn't just about one match. This is about what comes next, or more accurately, what doesn't. Djokovic is 38 years old. His body is breaking down. The recovery time between matches is getting longer, and legs that once covered every inch of the court are slowing. Margin for error is disappearing, and the wolves are circling Jannik Sinner, Carlos Alcaraz, a new generation that doesn't fear him anymore, a generation that has figured out how to beat him, a generation that smells blood. Tennis experts across the world are now asking the same devastating question, not whether Djokovic can win another slam, but whether he ever will. This is the story of the 2026 Australian Open final, the night Djokovic's reign truly ended, and the brutal truth about what his future holds. Novak Djokovic arrived in Melbourne carrying the weight of a year that had shaken his aura of invincibility to its core. The 2025 season had been unlike anything he'd experienced in his prime. Early exits at tournaments he used to dominate, losses to players he would have dismantled without breaking a sweat 5 years earlier. His entire offseason was built around one singular goal. He adjusted his training regimen to preserve his body for the grueling 2-week marathon ahead, modified his diet to optimize recovery between matches, and strategically managed his schedule to ensure that his 38-year-old legs would peak at exactly the moment he needed them most. Melbourne had always been his sanctuary, the place where his game reached its highest level and his mental fortitude proved most unshakable. 10 titles in this city, 10 finals without a single defeat, a record so dominant that it seemed almost supernatural. If there was any tournament left on the calendar where Novak Djokovic could still summon the greatness that defined his career, it was here. The opening week unfolded exactly as Djokovic had planned, with performances sharp enough to silence the skeptics who had written him off before the tournament began. His serve found its rhythm early, his returns carried the suffocating precision that had broken so many opponents over the years, and the mental intensity that separates champions from contenders was visible in every clutch moment. The rust of a difficult 2025 season was shaking off with each match, and by the time he reached the second week, the Djokovic of old appeared to be emerging just when the stakes demanded it most. Then came the semifinal against Jannik Sinner, the world number one, the player who had dominated tennis for the past 18 months, and the opponent everyone believed would finally end Djokovic's stranglehold on Melbourne. The narrative seemed predetermined. The young Italian would complete his ascension by dethroning the aging legend on his own turf. What happened instead was a performance that reminded the world why Novak Djokovic is considered the greatest competitor in the history of tennis. Over the course of 5 brutal sets, he saved 16 of 18 breakpoints while dismantling Sinner's game with the tactical brilliance that had carried him to 24 major titles. He ran down balls that should have been winners, extended rallies until his younger opponent's legs began to fail, and outthought a player 2 decades his junior at every critical juncture. The scoreline read 3-6, 6-3, 4-6, 6-4, 6-4, a testament to the kind of warrior spirit that cannot be taught or replicated. When the final ball landed, Djokovic collapsed onto the court as the stadium erupted around him, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he had just accomplished at an age when most players have long since retired. The tennis world responded with disbelief and reverence, convinced that they had just witnessed the defining moment of a championship run that would culminate in Grand Slam number 25. Every expert, every commentator, every fan watching believed the same thing. That destiny had cleared a path for one final coronation. Standing on that court with tears in his eyes, speaking about the sacrifices and doubts and hunger that still burned inside him, Djokovic looked like a man who had already won the tournament. He had no idea that the victory which should have propelled him to glory had actually sealed his fate. While Djokovic was engaged in his epic battle with Sinner, Carlos Alcaraz had been cutting through the draw with the kind of ruthless efficiency that announces the arrival of a generational talent in his prime. His semifinal against Alexander Zverev had stretched beyond 5 hours and pushed him to the absolute brink of physical collapse, with cramping threatening to end his tournament and controversy swirling around a medical timeout that infuriated his opponent. But Alcaraz had found a way to survive when his body was screaming for mercy, digging into reserves of willpower that separated champions from everyone else. At just 22 years old, Alcaraz had already captured 2 Wimbledon titles, conquered Roland Garros, and lifted the trophy at the US Open, leaving only the Australian Open between him and the career Grand Slam. The magnitude of what he was chasing added an extra dimension of motivation to an already formidable competitor, because completing that achievement would establish him as the youngest man in tennis history to hold all 4 majors. The contrast between them told the story that numbers alone could not capture. Djokovic carrying the accumulated wisdom of 2 decades at the top, but also the accumulated mileage on a body that had been pushed to its limits thousands of times, while Alcaraz brought the fearlessness of youth combined with a skill set that experts were already comparing to the greatest players who ever lived. For Djokovic, this was likely his final chance to add to a legacy that had already exceeded every reasonable expectation. For Alcaraz, it was the opportunity to announce that the throne had changed hands permanently. The stakes could not have been higher for both men. The atmosphere inside Rod Laver Arena on the night of February 1st crackled with the kind of electricity that only the biggest moments in sport can generate. When Djokovic emerged from the tunnel, the ovation that greeted him carried an undertone of something beyond mere appreciation. It felt like a farewell, as if the crowd understood they might be witnessing the final act of an extraordinary career. Alcaraz followed moments later, relaxed and smiling with the easy confidence of a young champion who carried no fear of the moment or the man waiting across the net. The first set revealed immediately that something was wrong with Djokovic. Whether it was the physical toll of his 5-set war against Sinner just 48 hours earlier, the mental weight of chasing history at an age when most players have retired, or simply the impossibility of matching the explosive power of a 22-year-old in peak condition, Djokovic's ground strokes lacked their characteristic depth, and his movement appeared half a step behind where it needed to be. Alcaraz recognized the vulnerability instantly and attacked with the predatory instinct that defines elite champions, unleashing forehand winners that exploded off the court surface while mixing in drop shots that exploited every hesitation in Djokovic's footwork. The first set disappeared in 37 minutes, a 6-2 scoreline that sent shockwaves through a stadium that had expected a different opening. During the changeover, Djokovic sat motionless with a towel draped over his head, searching for answers that his body might no longer be capable of providing. Down a set in what could be his final Grand Slam final, he needed to find something extraordinary within himself, the kind of competitive fury that had carried him through impossible situations throughout his career. The second set brought glimpses of the champion the world remembered. His returns grew sharper, his defense became stickier, and when he broke Alcaraz's serve midway through the set, the crowd responded with a roar that seemed to lift him physically. The fight that had defined his career was emerging when he needed it most. But every surge forward was met with an answer from Alcaraz, who refused to allow Djokovic to build any sustained momentum. The Spaniard's serve proved nearly impossible to break when it mattered most, and his ability to produce winners from seemingly neutral positions kept Djokovic from ever establishing the stranglehold that had broken so many opponents before. The second set ended with the same 6-2 scoreline, and suddenly Djokovic found himself facing elimination. 2 sets down against a younger, faster, fresher opponent who had never lost his nerve in a major final. The mathematics of the situation were brutal. Djokovic would need to win 3 consecutive sets against a player who had already demonstrated he was the better man on the night, and he would need to do it with legs that had already carried him through 5 sets against Sinner. What followed was the kind of defiance that separates legends from ordinary champions. Djokovic threw everything he had at Alcaraz, every trick accumulated over 2 decades at the top, every tactical adjustment, every ounce of competitive fury that had made him the most mentally intimidating player of his generation. The rallies grew longer and more intense, with both men pushing each other to the limits of their ability. When Djokovic claimed the third set 6-3, the arena shook with an emotion that transcended normal sporting excitement. The impossible had begun to feel possible again, and every person in that stadium believed they were witnessing one of the great comebacks in tennis history unfolding before their eyes. The fourth set became a war of attrition that neither man seemed willing to lose. Games stretched into marathon battles of serve and return, with both players saving breakpoints through sheer force of will. Djokovic had opportunities, moments where a single converted breakpoint would have swung the set decisively in his direction, but Alcaraz's composure under pressure proved unbreakable. As the set wore on, the physical toll of the fortnight began to show in Djokovic's movement, with the explosive first step that defines his defense visibly diminished. Alcaraz sensed the opening and raised his level at precisely the moment his opponent began to fade. The scoreline of 7-5 in the fourth set masked how close the match had been to tilting in Djokovic's favor, but the outcome was final and devastating. Carlos Alcaraz dropped to his knees with tears streaming down his face, having achieved something that only the rarest talents in tennis history have accomplished. 7 Grand Slam titles before his 23rd birthday, the career Grand Slam complete, and the definitive announcement that a new era had begun. On the other side of the net stood Novak Djokovic, his perfect record in Australian Open finals shattered, his body depleted beyond recovery, and his chances of reaching 25 Grand Slams suddenly seeming more distant than they had at any point in his career. Within hours of the final point, the tennis world's most respected voices began delivering a verdict that was as brutal as it was unanimous. Mats Wilander spoke with the authority of a 7-time Grand Slam champion who understood intimately what it takes to compete at the highest level, and his assessment was unsparing. He observed that the physical requirements of winning majors in the current era, the explosive movement, the 5-set endurance, the ability to recover between matches, had simply exceeded what a 38-year-old body could consistently produce, regardless of how great the champion or how strong the will. John McEnroe offered praise for the Sinner semifinal while simultaneously acknowledging the devastating truth that performance had revealed. He described it as one of the greatest matches he had ever witnessed Djokovic play, but noted that the victory had come at a cost that could never be recovered in time for the final. The tank was empty before the most important match of the tournament began. Patrick Mouratoglou provided the coldest statistical analysis, observing that winning a Grand Slam in 2026 required defeating multiple top 10 opponents in best-of-5 formats across a 2-week period. At Djokovic's age, with Sinner and Alcaraz reaching their primes and showing no signs of vulnerability, the probability of accomplishing that feat 4 separate times in a single season approached mathematical impossibility. The consensus among experts who had spent their lives studying this sport pointed to an inescapable conclusion: that Djokovic had given everything he had in Melbourne, produced some of the best tennis of his late career, and still fallen short against an opponent who represented the future he could no longer prevent. In his post-match press conference, Djokovic addressed questions about his future with the kind of measured uncertainty that champions rarely display publicly. He spoke about gratitude for what he had already accomplished, rather than hunger for what remained to be conquered, about appreciating the journey rather than fixating on destinations not yet reached. The words of a man still fighting sounded suspiciously like the words of a man preparing for the end. 3 Grand Slam tournaments remain on the 2026 calendar, each representing a theoretical opportunity for Djokovic to add to his legacy, and each presenting obstacles that grow more insurmountable by the month. Roland Garros has always been the most physically punishing major on the calendar, with the slow clay surface extending rallies to marathon lengths and demanding the kind of endurance that 38-year-old legs struggle to provide. Djokovic captured 3 titles in Paris but hasn't lifted the Coupe des Mousquetaires since 2023, and the prospect of surviving 7 best-of-5 matches against the young clay court specialists who will be lying in wait seems almost impossibly daunting. Wimbledon once stood as Djokovic's most reliable hunting ground outside of Melbourne, but the All England club now belongs to Carlos Alcaraz, in a way that mirrors Djokovic's own dominance of decades past. The Spaniard has claimed the last 2 titles with performances that suggest he views the grass as his natural surface, and defeating him in a best-of-5 final on courts he has mastered would require Djokovic to find a level he hasn't consistently produced in years. The US Open presents its own unique challenges for an aging champion. Brutal late summer heat, matches that stretch past midnight, and recovery demands that push even young bodies to their limits. Djokovic's last title in New York came in 2023, and the combination of physical factors and the relentless depth of competition at Flushing Meadows makes another deep run increasingly difficult to envision. The fundamental problem extends beyond any individual tournament or opponent. Biology operates according to laws that even the greatest champions cannot defy indefinitely. 38-year-old athletes do not suddenly recover the explosiveness of their youth or develop the ability to bounce back from grueling matches with the freshness they possessed a decade earlier. Every month that passes widens the gap between what Djokovic's mind demands and what his body can deliver. Meanwhile, Sinner and Alcaraz continue their ascent with the remorseless momentum of generational talents entering their prime years. They learn from every encounter with Djokovic, studying his patterns and exploiting his limitations with increasing effectiveness. The fear that once paralyzed opponents when they saw his name on the draw has evaporated, replaced by the confidence of young champions who believe their time has definitively arrived. Nothing that happens from this point forward can diminish what Novak Djokovic accomplished during his extraordinary career. 24 Grand Slam titles stand as the highest number any male player has ever achieved, a record that seemed permanently out of reach when Federer and Nadal were being crowned as the 2 greatest of all time. 428 weeks at world number 1 represent a feat of sustained excellence that may never be equaled. The career Golden Slam, the dominance across all surfaces, the mental fortitude that broke generation after generation of challengers, these achievements exist permanently in the historical record. But even legends must eventually confront the opponent that no one defeats, time itself. The evidence has accumulated gradually but unmistakably over the past 2 years. The legs that once covered every inch of the court now arrive a fraction of a second late on shots that used to be routine. The recovery between matches that once seemed effortless now requires increasingly elaborate protocols. The opponents who used to wilt under his mental pressure now stand firm, emboldened by the knowledge that the aura of invincibility has faded. The 2026 Australian Open may not represent the absolute end of Djokovic's Grand Slam career. He could return to the tour for another year or 2, could perhaps find one final magical run through a major draw. But the experts who have analyzed this sport for decades are nearly unanimous in their assessment that the realistic window for adding to his total has effectively closed. Carlos Alcaraz now carries the burden and the blessing of being tennis's undisputed future king. 7 Grand Slam titles before his 23rd birthday, the career Grand Slam complete, and a trajectory that could see him challenge records that once seemed permanently out of reach. Novak Djokovic leaves Melbourne with questions that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago hanging over his legacy. Whether he can summon one more transcendent performance remains uncertain, but the consensus amongst those who understand this sport suggests that the pursuit of 25 has become something closer to fantasy than realistic ambition. But the truth that emerged from Melbourne is undeniable. Novak Djokovic arrived seeking to cement his status as the greatest of all time with a 25th Grand Slam title, and he departed having suffered the first Australian Open final defeat of his legendary career. 24 Grand Slam titles may stand as the final number in the greatest career the sport has ever witnessed. If this story captured something real about the end of an era, Subscribe to this channel for more content that goes beyond the scorelines to reveal what truly matters in tennis. We'll see you in the next one.